Standing barefoot in 6 inches of fresh Colorado snow at 11:47 p.m. on New Year's Eve, watching my husband Tyler laugh through our living room window as he deliberately turned the deadbolt to lock me out of my own house, I realized that some betrayals are so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that they deserve a response equally as calculated. What Tyler didn't know as he raised his beer bottle in a mock toast to my humiliation was that he'd just declared war on a woman who had finally run out of patience for his games. By the time the clock struck midnight, I wasn't just locked out of my house. I was locked and loaded for the fight of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, I was Jessica Thompson, and I genuinely believed I was living the life I'd always dreamed of. Our house in Highlands Ranch was everything Tyler and I had talked about during those late-night conversations when we were dating. A sprawling 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, mature oak trees in the backyard, and enough space to host the dinner parties I loved throwing for our friends. The kitchen was my pride and joy, with granite countertops I'd saved for months to afford, and a farmhouse sink where I'd spent countless Sunday mornings washing dishes while Tyler read me interesting articles from his tablet. Tyler Mitchell had swept me off my feet 5 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, where I'd been standing awkwardly by the potato salad table, trying to work up the courage to join a conversation about hiking trails I'd never been on. He'd appeared beside me with that easy smile that made my stomach flip, asking if I knew whether the potato salad was homemade because his grandmother had ruined him for store-bought versions. We'd ended up talking for 3 hours about everything from family recipes to our shared dream of renovating an old house together. He was tall and solid in the way that made me feel protected, with calloused hands from his construction work and laugh lines around his green eyes that deepened when he told stories about the ridiculous things his crew had seen on job sites. By our second date, he was already talking about the future in a way that made my heart race with possibility. Tyler had a 5-year plan that included starting his own construction company, buying a house we could fix up together, and eventually having a couple of kids who could help him build tree houses in the backyard. He was ambitious but grounded, romantic but practical, and he had this way of making me feel like I was essential to every dream he shared. When he talked about our future house, he'd say things like, "When you're cooking Sunday dinner in our kitchen," or "after you've planted those flower beds you're always talking about," as if my presence in his life was as certain as sunrise. The proposal came during our 3rd Christmas together, on Christmas morning in front of my parents' fireplace while my whole family watched from the kitchen doorway. Tyler had hidden the ring inside the ornament I always hung first on the tree, a delicate glass snowflake my grandmother had given me. When I lifted it from the box and felt the weight was different, when I turned it over and saw the ring nestled inside, I started crying before he even got down on one knee. The ring was perfect. A classic solitaire setting with a diamond that caught the Christmas lights like captured fire. He'd somehow managed to pick exactly what I would have chosen for myself, which felt like proof that he truly understood me in a way no one else ever had. Our wedding the following fall was everything I'd imagined since I was 12 years old, flipping through bridal magazines and dreaming about my perfect day. We got married at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs, with the mountains providing a breathtaking backdrop for our outdoor ceremony. I wore my great-grandmother's pearl necklace and carried white peonies mixed with eucalyptus, their subtle fragrance mixing with the crisp autumn air. Tyler looked devastating in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his eyes never leaving mine as I walked down the aisle. When he saw me, his composure cracked just enough for tears to slip down his cheeks, and I felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. The reception was magical, with string lights twinkling overhead, and our first dance to "At Last" by Etta James, while our families and friends watched with the kind of joy that makes you believe in happy endings. Tyler spun me around the dance floor like we were the only 2 people in the world, whispering promises about all the adventures we'd have together. We spent our honeymoon in Maui, where Tyler surprised me with a couple's massage and a sunset dinner on the beach, where he'd arranged for the staff to spell out, "I love you, Jess," in rose petals on our table. I felt so cherished, so absolutely certain that I'd chosen the right person to build a life with. The first year of marriage was everything those wedding magazines had promised it would be. We settled into domestic bliss in our rental apartment while we saved for a house, creating traditions that felt like the foundation of a lifetime together. Sunday morning pancakes became our thing, with Tyler making elaborate shapes while I perfected my coffee brewing technique. We'd spend entire weekends at home improvement stores, planning our future house down to the cabinet hardware and paint colors. Tyler would hold paint samples up to my face in the lighting section, declaring that sage green brought out my eyes and cream white made my skin look luminous. These weren't grand romantic gestures, but they felt intimate and permanent in a way that made me believe we were building something real and lasting. When we finally found the house in Highlands Ranch, I knew immediately it was meant to be ours. It was a 1995 colonial that needed work but had good bones, as Tyler put it, running his hands along the original hardwood floors and pointing out details that showed quality construction. The kitchen needed updating, the master bathroom was stuck in the 90s, and the backyard was more weeds than grass. But Tyler saw potential everywhere he looked. He'd walk through the rooms talking about opening up walls, adding built-in shelving, and creating the kind of space where we could host Thanksgiving dinner for 20 people. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting excited about projects I'd never imagined tackling. I used most of my inheritance from my grandmother to make the down payment and fund the initial renovations. My grandmother had always told me that a house was the best investment a woman could make, that owning property gave you independence and security that no one could take away. She'd worked 2 jobs for 30 years to pay off her little bungalow, and when she passed away, she left me enough to do what she'd always dreamed of, buying a real home instead of renting someone else's. Tyler was grateful but never made me feel like I was keeping score. He contributed what he could from his project manager salary and threw himself into the physical work with the kind of enthusiasm that made me fall in love with him all over again. The renovation process brought us closer together in ways I hadn't expected. We'd spend weekends stripping wallpaper side by side, debating tile patterns, and celebrating small victories like the day we finally got the new chandelier hung in the dining room. Tyler had a gift for seeing how things would look when they were finished, and he'd describe our future rooms in such vivid detail that I could almost see them myself. He'd say things like, "Picture Christmas morning in here, with a tree in that corner and stockings hung on this mantle," and I'd feel this overwhelming sense of contentment at the idea of creating holiday memories in our own space. By the time we moved in, the house felt like a testament to our partnership. The kitchen was a perfect blend of my aesthetic preferences and Tyler's practical suggestions. White cabinets with brushed gold hardware, a subway tile backsplash, and an island large, enough for the dinner parties I loved hosting. The master bathroom had been transformed into a spa-like retreat with a soaking tub, where I could relax after long days at my marketing firm, and Tyler had built custom shelving in the walk-in closet that maximized every inch of space. The backyard had been landscaped with native plants that could handle Colorado's unpredictable weather, and Tyler had surprised me by installing a stone fire pit where we could sit on cool evenings. Our first year in the house established the rhythms that I thought would define our marriage. We hosted game nights every other Friday, where our group of 6 couples would rotate between houses for dinner and board games that usually devolved into heated debates about strategy and rule interpretations. Tyler was always the one telling jokes that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt, and I was the one making sure everyone's wine glasses stayed full, and that there were enough appetizers to keep the arguments friendly. Our friends always said we were the perfect entertaining team, that our house felt like the kind of place where people could relax and be themselves. Sunday dinners became another cherished tradition, where I'd spend the afternoon cooking elaborate meals while Tyler worked on house projects or watched football with friends who'd inevitably stay for dinner. I loved the routine of planning menus, shopping for ingredients, and creating meals that brought people together around our dining room table. Tyler would always make a toast before we ate, thanking everyone for coming and saying something about how lucky he felt to have such good friends and such an amazing wife. These moments felt like the life I'd always imagined, warm, welcoming, full of laughter and love. The holidays were especially magical in our new house. Our first Thanksgiving, I cooked for 14 people, using every burner on the stove and both ovens, while Tyler managed logistics like a military operation, ensuring everyone had drinks and that the timing worked out perfectly. He'd set up a kids' table in the living room and spent most of the afternoon entertaining our friends' children with card tricks and stories about haunted construction sites. Watching him interact with kids always made my heart flutter with anticipation for the day we'd have our own family. Christmas was even better. with Tyler insisting we get the biggest tree that would fit in our living room and then spending an entire weekend helping me decorate it with ornaments we'd collected from our travels and gifts from family members. He'd put on Christmas music and make hot chocolate while I hung each decoration in exactly the right spot, and he never complained about my perfectionist tendencies or the fact that it took me 3 hours to get the tree exactly right. Instead, he'd say things like, "I love how much thought you put into making everything beautiful," or "This is going to be the kids' favorite Christmas memory someday." Valentine's Day. Tyler surprised me with a weekend getaway to a cabin near Red Rocks, where we hiked during the day and spent evenings by the fireplace playing cards and talking about our dreams for the future. He'd packed everything perfectly, from my favorite wine to the books I'd been meaning to read, and he'd even brought ingredients for s'mores because he remembered me mentioning that I'd never made them over a real fire. These weren't expensive or flashy gestures, but they showed that he paid attention to the little things that mattered to me, that he wanted to create experiences we'd remember forever. By our 3rd anniversary, I felt like we'd built something solid and lasting. Our marriage had survived the stress of home renovation, the adjustment period of living together, and the inevitable conflicts that come with merging 2 lives into one shared existence. We'd developed our own language of inside jokes and shared references, our own ways of handling disagreements without letting them escalate into real fights. Tyler would diffuse tension with humor, and I'd smooth things over with thoughtful gestures like, "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. His favorite cookies or tickets to Broncos games. When work was stressing him out, our friends considered us the stable couple in our group, the ones who had figured out how to make marriage look easy. When other couples were fighting about money or whose turn it was to take out the trash, Tyler and I seemed to have developed systems that worked for both of us. I handled the household management and social calendar because I was naturally organized, and Tyler took care of maintenance and repairs because he enjoyed working with his hands. We split financial responsibilities based on our incomes and never argued about money because we'd agreed early on that everything was ours, rather than mine and his. The summer before that fateful New Year's Eve, we'd hosted what everyone agreed was the party of the season for the 4th of July. Tyler had spent weeks building a custom deck in our backyard, complete with built-in benches and string lights that created the perfect ambiance for evening entertaining. I'd planned a menu that included all of our friends' favorite dishes, and we'd spent the day before the party cooking together, laughing about Tyler's attempt to help with the potato salad that had ended, with him being permanently banned from mayonnaise-related tasks. The party was perfect, 40 people in our backyard, kids running around with sparklers while adults played cornhole and debated the best barbecue techniques. Tyler grilled for hours without complaint, making sure everyone got exactly what they wanted and refusing help from the other men who offered to take over. I floated between groups of guests, making sure everyone felt welcome and that conversations flowed smoothly between people who didn't know each other well. At the end of the night, as we were cleaning up paper plates and beer bottles, Tyler pulled me into a dance on our new deck while fireworks exploded in the distance. "This is exactly what I pictured when we bought this house," he said, spinning me under the string lights while our neighbors' leftover fireworks painted the sky in gold and silver. "You make everything more beautiful, Jess. You make everything better." I felt so completely happy in that moment, so absolutely certain that we were building the kind of life I'd always dreamed of. Our house was filled with friends, our yard was full of laughter, and my husband was looking at me like I was the most amazing woman in the world. As fall arrived and we started planning our annual New Year's Eve party, I was already thinking about how to top the success of our 4th of July celebration. New Year's Eve had become our signature event over the past 2 years, the party that everyone in our friend group looked forward to all year. I loved planning themed decorations, creating a champagne bar with different types of bubbly and garnishes, and designing a menu that felt special enough for the occasion, but casual enough that people could relax and have fun. Tyler seemed just as excited about the party as I was, offering to handle the bar setup and entertainment while I focused on food and decorations. We spent weeks planning together, discussing guest lists and menu options, and debating whether to do a sit-down dinner or a cocktail party format. Tyler suggested we go bigger this year, inviting some of his work colleagues and their wives, along with our usual friend group. I was thrilled by his enthusiasm and started planning for 30 people instead of our usual 20. The week before the party, everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. I had taken vacation days to focus on preparation, spending Monday through Wednesday cooking appetizers that could be frozen, and making detailed lists of everything that needed to be done on the day of the party. Tyler had been working late every night, claiming he wanted to get ahead on January projects so he could fully enjoy the party without work stress. I appreciated his dedication and didn't mind handling most of the preparation myself, because I genuinely enjoyed the process of creating memorable experiences for our friends. December 30th, I spent the entire day transforming our house into a New Year's Eve wonderland. I'd bought gold and black decorations that created an elegant but festive atmosphere, with balloon arrangements in every room and string lights that made everything look magical. The dining room table was set with our good china and crystal glasses, ready for the midnight champagne toast. I'd created a photo booth area in the living room with props and a backdrop where people could take pictures to commemorate the evening. Everything looked absolutely perfect, like something from a party planning magazine. Tyler came home that evening while I was putting finishing touches on the appetizer platters, and his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. He walked through each room, admiring the decorations and telling me how incredible everything looked. He pulled me into the kitchen for a long kiss, saying he couldn't believe how lucky he was to have a wife who could create such beautiful experiences for their friends. We stood together in our perfectly prepared house, talking about how excited we were for the party, and making last-minute adjustments to the playlist and bar setup. That night, as we went to bed in our beautifully decorated house with everything ready for what I was sure would be our best party yet, I felt the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Tyler pulled me close as we settled into bed, telling me how much he loved me and how excited he was for another year of adventures together. I fell asleep feeling grateful for the life we'd built, the home we'd created, and the man who seemed to love and appreciate everything I brought to our partnership. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, that same man would be deliberately humiliating me in front of our friends, or that the party I'd spent weeks planning would become the stage for a betrayal so calculated and cruel that it would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage and myself. But as I drifted off to sleep on December 30th, surrounded by the warmth and security of what I believed was my perfectly happy life, I was still Jessica Thompson, devoted wife and gracious hostess, completely unprepared for the war that was about to be declared against me. December 31st started with Tyler's phone buzzing incessantly at 6 in the morning, pulling me from the deep sleep I'd finally managed after staying up late with party preparations. He grabbed the device quickly, his movements sharp and urgent in a way that seemed unusual for someone receiving work calls. When I mumbled something about it being New Year's Eve and asking who could possibly need him this early, Tyler was already heading toward the bathroom with the phone pressed to his ear, his voice dropping to a whisper I couldn't quite make out. I lay in bed listening to the muffled conversation through the bathroom door, catching fragments that didn't quite make sense. Tyler seemed to be discussing timing and coordination, but not in the way he usually talked about construction schedules. There was an edge to his voice, a tension that made my stomach flutter with unease even though I couldn't explain why. When he emerged 20 minutes later, fully dressed and grabbing his keys, he offered a rushed explanation about needing to handle a supplier emergency before the holiday weekend. "I'll be back in a couple hours," he said, kissing my forehead with what felt like distracted obligation rather than affection. "Don't worry about anything for the party. I'll handle all the last-minute stuff when I get home." His reassurance should have been comforting, but something about his hurried departure left me feeling unsettled. Tyler had never been the type to stress about work emergencies, and he'd never been secretive about business calls before. I spent the morning trying to shake off my unease by focusing on party preparations. There were still dozens of small tasks to complete, from arranging fresh flowers to setting up the champagne station, and keeping busy usually helped calm my nerves. But as I moved through our house, adjusting decorations and preparing food, I couldn't stop thinking about Tyler's abrupt departure and the strange tension in his voice during that early morning call. Around 10, I decided to text him about champagne quantities, wanting to make sure we had enough bottles for the midnight toast. The message showed as delivered but went unanswered for over an hour, which was completely unlike Tyler. He was usually quick to respond to texts, especially when they were about logistics for events we were hosting together. When he finally replied, his message was brief and oddly formal. "Trust your judgment on champagne. Handle whatever you think is best." The response bothered me more than it should have. Tyler had been enthusiastic about every aspect of party planning for weeks, offering opinions on everything from appetizer selections to music playlists. His sudden disinterest felt jarring, like talking to a different person entirely. I tried calling him to discuss a few other details, but the call went straight to voicemail with no explanation about why his phone might be off during a supposed work emergency. By noon, Tyler still wasn't home, and I was starting to feel genuinely worried. Construction emergencies didn't usually require 4-hour absences on holidays, and Tyler had never been unreachable for this long without explanation. I called his office and reached the answering service, which confirmed that no emergency calls had come in that morning. When I asked if they'd heard from Tyler, the operator seemed confused, saying she'd assumed the office was closed for the holiday weekend. I spent the next hour telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Tyler had gone to help a colleague with a personal project, or maybe he'd stopped to pick up last-minute party supplies as a surprise. But doubt was creeping in around the edges of my rationalizations, whispering that something fundamental had shifted in my husband's behavior. The Tyler I knew would never leave me alone on the day of our biggest party of the year, especially not without clear communication about when he'd return. When Tyler finally walked through our front door at 2:30, he seemed different in ways I couldn't quite articulate. His usual easy confidence had been replaced by something that felt performative, like he was consciously trying to appear normal rather than actually being normal. He apologized for being gone so long, explaining that the supplier meeting had led to an unexpected lunch with potential clients, but his story felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. "Sorry about the phone situation," he said, not quite meeting my eyes as he hung his keys on the hook by the door. "Battery died and I didn't have a charger in the truck." You know how it is. But I did know how it was, and Tyler always kept a phone charger in his truck specifically because he hated being unreachable. His explanation felt like the first outright lie he'd ever told me, and the realization hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to confront him about the inconsistencies in his story, but guests would be arriving in less than 5 hours, and I couldn't afford to have a serious conversation that might derail our entire evening. Instead, I channeled my nervous energy into final party preparations, hoping that Tyler's strange behavior was just holiday stress that would resolve itself once our friends arrived and the evening got underway. Tyler threw himself into party setup with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm, but I found myself watching him carefully, looking for signs of whatever had changed during his mysterious absence. He was going through all the right motions, setting up the bar and testing the sound system, but there was something hollow about his engagement. When I tried to joke with him about our friends' predictable party behaviors, his laughter seemed forced, and he kept checking his phone in a way that suggested he was expecting important messages. Around 4, I was arranging appetizers when I noticed Tyler having what appeared to be a tense text conversation. His face was serious, his fingers moving quickly across the screen, and when I approached to ask if everything was okay, he quickly slipped the phone into his pocket with a guilty expression I'd never seen before. "Just coordinating with the guys about tomorrow's football game," he said, but his voice had that same rehearsed quality I'd noticed earlier. You know how complicated it gets, trying to figure out whose house we're watching at. The explanation was plausible, but Tyler had never been secretive about sports planning before, and the intensity of his focus on those messages seemed completely disproportionate to organizing a casual football gathering. As our first guests began arriving at 6, I pushed my concerns to the back of my mind and focused on being the hostess our friends expected me to be. Ashley and her husband David were the first to arrive, followed quickly by our neighbors Mark and Jennifer, and soon our house was filling with the warm energy of people genuinely excited to celebrate together. Everyone complimented the decorations and the food, and the early evening felt like it was building toward exactly the kind of memorable celebration I'd envisioned. Tyler seemed to relax as more people arrived, slipping back into his familiar role as the charming host who made everyone feel welcome. He was telling jokes, mixing drinks, and engaging in the kind of easy conversation that had always made our parties feel special. For a while, I convinced myself that I'd been overreacting to his earlier behavior, that whatever stress had been affecting him was simply melting away in the warmth of good friends and holiday celebration. But as the evening progressed, I began noticing small things that didn't quite fit the Tyler I knew. He was drinking more than usual, not in a sloppy way, but with a focused intensity that seemed designed to maintain a specific mood rather than simply enjoy the party. He was also more animated than normal, his jokes a little too loud, his laughter a little too eager, like he was performing the role of happy host, rather than naturally inhabiting it. Around 8, I was refreshing appetizer platters in the kitchen when I overheard Tyler talking to Mark about work projects for the new year. What caught my attention was that Tyler was describing plans I'd never heard before, mentioning potential job sites and client meetings that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. When I joined their conversation to ask about these new developments, Tyler smoothly changed the subject to Mark's recent promotion, deflecting my curiosity with practiced ease. The deflection bothered me more than it should have. Tyler and I shared everything about our work lives, celebrating successes and strategizing through challenges together. The idea that he might be pursuing major business opportunities without mentioning them felt like a fundamental shift in our partnership, and I couldn't understand why he would suddenly become secretive about professional developments. At 9, I noticed Tyler checking his phone again, this time with an expression of anticipation that made my stomach clench with unease. When the device buzzed with what appeared to be the message he'd been waiting for, his face lit up with genuine excitement for the first time all day. He quickly typed a response, then slipped the phone away and threw himself back into party hosting with renewed energy that felt both authentic and completely disconnected from anything happening in our living room. I tried to engage him in conversation about the success of the party, pointing out how much fun everyone seemed to be having and suggesting we might want to plan something similar for Valentine's Day. But Tyler's responses were distracted, his attention clearly split between our guests and whatever was happening on his phone. When I asked directly if something was bothering him, he assured me that everything was perfect, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Around 10, the party was hitting its stride, with groups of friends scattered throughout our house, conversation flowing easily, and everyone settling into the comfortable rhythm of celebration that would carry us toward midnight. I should have been feeling the deep satisfaction that came from hosting a successful gathering, but instead I found myself feeling increasingly isolated from my own party, watching Tyler perform the role of devoted husband while something fundamental seemed to be missing from his engagement. When Brittany Walsh arrived at 10:15, fashionably late as always, I initially felt nothing but mild annoyance at her timing. Brittany was part of Tyler's construction industry network, the wife of one of his subcontractors, and she had a tendency to make dramatic entrances that drew attention away from other guests. She was undeniably beautiful in an Instagram-ready way, with perfect blonde highlights and a wardrobe that suggested she spent considerably more on clothing than most construction families could afford. Tyler's reaction to Brittany's arrival was what first made me pay serious attention to her presence. His face lit up with an enthusiasm that had been missing from his interactions all evening, and he immediately abandoned the conversation he'd been having with David to greet her at the door. The hug they shared seemed to last a few seconds longer than appropriate for casual acquaintances, and when they separated, Tyler's hand lingered on Brittany's lower back in a way that made my chest tighten with unease. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Tyler was simply being his naturally friendly self with someone who was probably feeling awkward about arriving late to a party where she didn't know many people. But as I watched them interact over the next hour, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more than casual friendship in their dynamic. They seemed to share private jokes that excluded everyone around them, and their conversation had an intimacy that felt inappropriate for a married man and another man's wife. Around 11, I was clearing empty glasses from the living room when I noticed Tyler and Brittany standing close together near our fireplace, their heads bent toward each other in intense conversation. They weren't doing anything overtly inappropriate, but their body language suggested a level of familiarity that made my stomach turn with suspicion. When I approached them to offer fresh drinks, they separated quickly, their conversation shifting abruptly to benign topics about the party decorations. The change in their behavior when I joined them felt like confirmation that something inappropriate had been happening, even if I couldn't define exactly what. Tyler introduced me to Brittany as if we'd never met before, Despite the fact that we'd been introduced at several previous gatherings, Brittany smiled warmly and complimented the party arrangements, but there was something calculating in her eyes that made me feel like she was evaluating me, rather than simply making polite conversation. As 11:30 approached and our friends began gathering for the countdown to midnight, I found myself watching Tyler and Brittany more carefully. They weren't standing together, but I noticed them exchanging glances across the room that seemed loaded with meaning. When Tyler suggested everyone move outside to the deck for the countdown, citing the beautiful clear night and the view of neighborhood fireworks, Brittany was the first to enthusiastically agree, despite the fact that it was barely 20 degrees outside. The suggestion to move outside struck me as odd because Tyler had originally planned for us to do the countdown in the living room, where it would be warm and comfortable for everyone. We'd discussed the logistics extensively, and he'd been adamant that indoor celebrations were more civilized than freezing on the deck. His sudden change of plans felt spontaneous in a way that suggested it hadn't been motivated by concern for our guests' comfort. As people began bundling up in coats and moving toward the back door, I realized I'd left my shoes upstairs and would need to grab them before joining everyone outside. Tyler was helping people with drinks and coordinating the champagne distribution, so I quickly ran upstairs to our bedroom to find my boots. What I overheard as I reached the top of the stairs made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Tyler was speaking quietly but urgently into his phone, clearly thinking he was out of earshot of the party guests. "Everything's ready," he was saying, his voice carrying the kind of excitement I hadn't heard from him all day. "She'll be outside with everyone else in about 5 minutes. That's when you can get in position. Just make sure the timing is perfect. I want maximum impact when it happens." I stood frozen on the staircase, my mind racing to make sense of what I was hearing. Tyler was clearly coordinating some kind of plan that involved me being outside with our guests, but the secretive nature of the conversation and his emphasis on timing and maximum impact sent chills down my spine. This wasn't the voice of my loving husband planning a romantic surprise. This was the voice of someone orchestrating something that required deception and careful coordination. "No, she has no idea," Tyler continued, and his tone had shifted to something I'd never heard before. Cold, calculating, almost cruel. "She's been running around all day playing perfect hostess, completely clueless about what's coming. This is going to be absolutely perfect. She deserves exactly what she's about to get, and everyone's going to see it happen." The words hit me like physical blows, each syllable stripping away another layer of the security I'd felt in my marriage. Tyler wasn't planning a surprise party or a romantic gesture. He was planning something designed to humiliate me in front of our friends, something he believed I deserved. The man I'd been married to for 3 years, the man I'd trusted with my heart and my financial future, was actively plotting against me. I crept back down the stairs as quietly as possible, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd overheard. Whatever Tyler was planning would happen outside, in front of our friends, and it would be timed for maximum humiliation. The thought of facing whatever cruelty he'd orchestrated made me feel physically sick, but I knew I couldn't hide upstairs forever without arousing suspicion. As I rejoined our guests, grabbing my coat and forcing my face into what I hoped was a convincing smile, I felt like I was walking into a trap. Tyler was already outside, helping people find spots on the deck and distributing champagne glasses, with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely excited about celebrating the new year. But now I could see the performance in his actions, the way he was positioning people and checking his phone with barely concealed anticipation. The countdown to midnight was beginning, our friends clustering together in the cold with their champagne glasses raised, everyone laughing and talking about their hopes for the new year. I found myself standing slightly apart from the group, hyper-aware of Tyler's location and watching for signs of whatever he'd planned. When he caught my eye and smiled, the expression looked predatory in a way that made my skin crawl. As our friends began chanting the final 10 seconds before midnight, Tyler moved toward the back door with purpose that confirmed my worst fears. At the stroke of midnight, as everyone around us erupted in celebration and began hugging and kissing, Tyler stepped inside the house and I heard the unmistakable sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. The realization of what was happening hit me a split second before I heard the lock engage. Tyler had orchestrated this entire evening to end with him locking me out of my own house in front of all our friends, in sub-freezing weather, while they were all too drunk and distracted by the celebration to immediately notice what had happened. The cruelty was so calculated, so deliberately designed to maximize my humiliation, that it took my breath away. As I stood there in my party dress and thin coat, watching Tyler's silhouette through our living room window as he calmly walked away from the door he'd just locked, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The woman who had spent 3 years making excuses for increasingly concerning behavior, who had rationalized away red flags and prioritized keeping the peace over protecting herself, was finally done being anyone's victim. Tyler had chosen this moment, this audience, this method, because he wanted to destroy me in the most public and humiliating way possible. What he didn't know was that he'd just declared war on someone who was finally ready to fight back with everything she had. The game he thought he was winning had just become a battle for my life, my dignity, and my future, and I was about to show him exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The first thing I noticed was the silence that fell over our friends as they gradually realized what had happened. The champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips, the confused glances being exchanged, the way conversations died mid-sentence as people processed the sight of me standing locked out while Tyler was clearly visible inside the house, calmly walking toward the kitchen as if nothing unusual had occurred. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and my breath was forming visible clouds in the frigid air, but the cold seeping through my party dress was nothing compared to the ice spreading through my chest as I understood the full scope of my husband's calculated cruelty. Ashley was the first to speak, her voice uncertain and bewildered as she approached the sliding door and tried the handle. "Jess, did Tyler lock this by accident? Maybe he didn't realize you were still outside." Her attempt to rationalize what we'd all witnessed was exactly what I would have done in her position, searching for an innocent explanation that would preserve everyone's comfort and dignity. But as I watched Tyler through the window, making no move to unlock the door despite the obvious commotion on the deck, I knew there was nothing accidental about this situation. "Tyler!" David called out, banging on the glass with increasing urgency. "Hey man, open up, Jess is locked out here." His voice carried across the quiet neighborhood, loud enough that I cringed, thinking about our neighbors hearing the desperation in his tone. Tyler's response was to glance toward the deck with what appeared to be mild curiosity, as if he was surprised to discover we were still outside. He raised his beer bottle in a mock toast, his smile visible through the window, and then deliberately turned his back to us. The gesture was so overtly cruel, so unmistakably intentional, that several of our friends gasped audibly. Jennifer grabbed my arm, her face pale with shock and confusion. "What the hell is happening right now? Why is Tyler acting like this?" Her question hung in the frigid air like an accusation, and I realized that I had no answer that would make sense to anyone, including myself. "How do you explain that your husband has just publicly humiliated you for reasons you don't understand, using methods that suggest he's been planning this cruelty for who knows how long?" Mark was already pulling out his phone, muttering about calling Tyler directly, but I knew instinctively that Tyler wouldn't answer. This wasn't a situation he intended to resolve quickly or quietly. The timing, the audience, the deliberate nature of his actions, everything about this moment had been designed to maximize my humiliation and his control over the situation. He wanted our friends to witness my helplessness, to see me locked out of my own home like some unwanted intruder while he held all the power. Brittany, who had been unusually quiet during the initial confusion, suddenly stepped forward with what appeared to be helpful concern. "Maybe there's another way in? A spare key or a window that might be unlocked?" Her suggestion seemed reasonable on the surface, but something about her tone felt performative, like she was playing a role she'd rehearsed. When I looked at her more closely, I noticed that she didn't seem nearly as surprised by Tyler's behavior as everyone else. Her shock appeared calculated rather than genuine, and she kept glancing toward the house with what looked like anticipation rather than worry. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Brittany wasn't just an innocent bystander to Tyler's cruelty. She was part of it. The mysterious phone calls, the secretive text messages, the way Tyler's entire demeanor had changed when she arrived at the party, it all suddenly made horrible sense. Whatever Tyler was doing to me, Brittany was his accomplice, and she was standing here on my deck, pretending to be concerned while watching me suffer the consequences of their joint planning. "The spare key is inside," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the wind that was picking up across our backyard. Tyler moved it last month when we had the landscaping done. Said it was more secure to keep it in the mudroom. The explanation sounded hollow even to my own ears, a reminder of how many small decisions Tyler had made recently that I'd accepted without question. How many other preparations had he made for this moment that I'd been too trusting to recognize? Ashley immediately started trying windows, moving around the deck with increasing desperation, while Mark continued attempting to call Tyler's phone. David was banging on the door with more force now, his polite requests escalating to angry demands. "This isn't funny anymore, Tyler. Open the damn door!" But Tyler had disappeared from view, apparently having moved deeper into the house where he could ignore our friend's protests more easily. The worst part wasn't the cold, or the humiliation, or even the growing realization that my marriage was built on lies I was only beginning to understand. The worst part was watching my friends' faces as they processed what was happening, seeing their confusion transform into anger on my behalf, knowing that Tyler had turned what should have been our celebration into a public spectacle of my powerlessness. These people had come to our home expecting warmth and friendship, and instead, they were witnessing the deliberate destruction of my dignity. Jennifer had found her voice again, and her anger was building with each passing minute. "This is insane. What kind of man locks his wife out of her own house? In this weather? In front of their friends?" She was pacing the deck now, her champagne glass forgotten on the railing as she tried to process Tyler's behavior. There has to be something else going on here. People don't just snap like this without reason. But that was exactly what I was beginning to realize. Tyler hadn't snapped. This wasn't an impulsive moment of cruelty brought on by too much alcohol or holiday stress. The planning, the coordination, the way he'd positioned everyone outside before executing his plan. This was premeditated emotional abuse, designed to break me down in the most public way possible. The man I'd been married to for 3 years had spent time thinking about how to hurt me most effectively, and this was the result of his careful consideration. Ashley had completed her circuit of the deck and returned with tears freezing on her cheeks. Every window is locked tight. The front door probably is too, and even if it isn't, Tyler would see us coming. Her practical assessment of our situation was accurate but depressing. We were trapped outside in sub-freezing weather while Tyler held all the control, and our options for resolving the situation were entirely dependent on his willingness to end his game. David had given up on being polite and was now shouting threats through the glass. "Tyler, if you don't open this door right now, I'm calling the police. You can't lock your wife out in this weather. This is domestic abuse." His words carried the weight of legal consequences that Tyler apparently hadn't considered, or perhaps didn't care about. The suggestion that this situation might constitute a crime added another layer of horror to what was happening. But when David actually started dialing 911, Brittany quickly intervened with what seemed like reasonable concern. "Maybe we should give Tyler a few more minutes before involving the police. There might be some kind of explanation we're not seeing." Calling the cops on New Year's Eve could really escalate things unnecessarily. Her attempt to de-escalate the situation would have seemed thoughtful if I hadn't already begun to suspect her involvement in Tyler's plan. Mark, who had been the voice of reason throughout the crisis, finally spoke up with frustration that matched my own growing anger. What possible explanation could justify this? Tyler locked his wife out of her own house during a blizzard while she's wearing a party dress. There's no innocent interpretation of that behavior. His words cut through the cold air with stark clarity, stripping away any remaining possibility that this was some kind of misunderstanding. The mention of the blizzard made me look up and realize that the weather was indeed worsening rapidly. What had been light snow when we'd come outside was now heavy flakes driven by wind that cut through my coat like it was made of tissue paper. The temperature was dropping fast enough that I could feel my fingers going numb despite my attempts to keep them warm. Tyler had chosen his timing perfectly, ensuring that the weather would add urgency to my situation while limiting my options for finding alternative shelter. "We need to get Jess somewhere warm," Ashley said, her practical nursing instincts overriding social awkwardness. "She's going to get hypothermia if she stays out here much longer." The medical concern in her voice added urgency to our situation that made Tyler's cruelty seem even more calculated. He wasn't just humiliating me. He was putting my physical safety at risk in service of whatever point he was trying to make. Jennifer immediately offered her house, which was only 2 blocks away, but I found myself reluctant to leave despite the cold and the humiliation. Something about running to a neighbor's house felt like giving Tyler exactly what he wanted, like proving that his plan had succeeded in driving me away from my own home. The stubborn part of me that had gotten through 3 years of marriage to a man who was clearly capable of deliberate cruelty wanted to stay and fight, rather than retreat. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is my house. I paid for the down payment, I paid for the renovations, and I'm not going to let Tyler chase me away from my own home." The words surprised me with their firmness, and I realized that somewhere in the midst of my shock and humiliation, anger was beginning to take hold. Real anger, not the polite frustration I'd learned to express during 3 years of marriage to someone who apparently saw me as an enemy to be defeated, rather than a partner to be cherished. My friends exchanged worried glances, clearly concerned about my physical safety but also recognizing the principle I was defending. This wasn't just about getting warm, it was about refusing to let Tyler's cruelty succeed in its obvious goal of driving me away from my own life. If I left now, if I let him establish that he could lock me out whenever he pleased, what would stop him from escalating his control in even more dangerous ways? David had moved closer to the house and was peering through different windows, trying to track Tyler's location inside. "I can see him in the kitchen," he reported. "He's got his phone out, and he's laughing. He's actually laughing while we're all out here freezing." The disgust in David's voice matched the sick feeling in my stomach as I processed the idea that Tyler was not only comfortable with my suffering, but actively enjoying it. The image of Tyler laughing while I stood locked outside in dangerous weather crystallized something important for me. This wasn't the behavior of someone having a mental health crisis or acting out of character due to stress. This was the behavior of someone who took pleasure in causing pain, someone who had carefully planned this moment to maximize my humiliation and his sense of power. The man I'd been married to for 3 years was revealing himself to be fundamentally different from the person I'd thought I knew. Brittany had moved closer to the house as well, ostensibly to help David track Tyler's movements, but I noticed she was positioning herself where she could see inside without being easily visible from outside. Her behavior was becoming more suspicious by the minute, and I found myself watching her as carefully as I was thinking about Tyler. When she pulled out her own phone and began typing rapidly, I felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. "Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through the wind with more authority than I'd expected. "Who are you texting right now?" The question surprised her enough that she looked up with genuine shock, her carefully maintained expression of concern slipping for just a moment. In that moment, I saw calculation rather than worry, and I knew with absolute certainty that she was communicating with Tyler about our situation. "Just my husband," she said quickly, but her answer came too fast and sounded too rehearsed. "Letting him know I might be late getting home because of all this." She gestured vaguely at our situation, but her explanation didn't make sense. Her husband wasn't expecting her home at any particular time, and there was no reason she would need to update him about our crisis, unless she was coordinating with someone else entirely. Ashley had caught the exchange and was now looking at Brittany with new suspicion. "Why would you need to text about being late when we're all stuck in the same situation? Wouldn't it make more sense to help us figure out how to get inside?" Her question was perfectly reasonable, and Brittany's inability to answer it convincingly confirmed what I was beginning to understand about her role in Tyler's plan. The realization that I was standing outside my own house, locked out by my husband, while his accomplice pretended to help me, was so surreal that I almost laughed. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, not just in its cruelty but in its complexity. Tyler hadn't just decided to humiliate me on a whim. He'd recruited help, planned timing, and coordinated multiple people to ensure his plan succeeded. This was conspiracy-level deception, and I was only beginning to understand how deep it went. Mark had noticed Brittany's suspicious behavior as well, and was watching her phone activity with growing anger. "Are you communicating with Tyler right now? Because if you know something about why this is happening, you need to speak up immediately." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to managing construction crews, and Brittany clearly hadn't expected to be challenged so directly. "I don't know anything about Tyler's motivations," she said, but her defensive tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just as confused as everyone else about why he would do something like this." The denial was technically plausible, but her body language told a different story. She was holding her phone protectively, avoiding eye contact, and positioning herself closer to the house, as if she was preparing to leave or communicate with someone inside. Jennifer had been watching this exchange with growing frustration, and her patience finally snapped. "You know what? I don't care what kind of weird game Tyler is playing or who else might be involved. Jess is going to get frostbite if we don't get her inside somewhere warm right now." Her practical concern cut through the growing tension and reminded everyone that my physical safety was more important than figuring out the details of Tyler's plan. But as my friends began organizing an exodus to Jennifer's house, I found myself focused on Brittany's phone, which had just buzzed with what was clearly a message she'd been waiting for. Her face lit up with barely concealed excitement as she read whatever Tyler had sent, and in that moment, I understood that this situation was far from over. Whatever Tyler had planned for tonight, locking me out was just the beginning. "I want to see that message," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "If Tyler is coordinating this humiliation with your help, I have a right to know what you're planning next." The demand was bold enough that even my friends looked surprised, but I was past caring about social niceties. If my marriage was a lie and my friends were conspirators, I wanted to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. Brittany's reaction confirmed my suspicions. Instead of showing me the phone or denying Tyler's involvement, she clutched the device closer and took a step back toward the house. "I think you're letting the cold affect your judgment, Jess. You're seeing conspiracies where there probably aren't any." Her attempt to gaslight me was so obvious that even Ashley gasped audibly. "Show her the phone, Brittany," David said, his voice carrying clear menace. "If there's nothing to hide, you shouldn't have any problem letting Jess see who you've been texting." His support gave me the courage to press harder, to demand answers instead of accepting excuses the way I'd been trained to do throughout my marriage. Instead of complying, Brittany made a decision that revealed everything I needed to know about her role in Tyler's plan. She turned and ran toward the front of the house, moving fast enough that it was clear she'd been prepared for this possibility. As she disappeared around the corner, I heard the unmistakable sound of our front door opening and closing, confirming that Tyler had been ready to let his accomplice inside, while leaving me locked out in potentially dangerous weather. The sight of Brittany disappearing into my house while I remained trapped outside was the final piece of evidence I needed to understand the true nature of what was happening. Tyler hadn't just planned to humiliate me, he'd planned to replace me. The woman who was now inside my house, probably sharing a drink with my husband while I froze on the deck, was the reason Tyler had felt confident enough to destroy our marriage so publicly and cruelly. Ashley grabbed my arm as the implications sank in for all of us. "Oh my God, Jess, Tyler's having an affair. This whole thing was planned to..." "To what?" "Get you out of the house so he could be with her." Her voice was filled with horror as she processed what we'd all witnessed, the deliberate nature of Tyler's cruelty becoming clear in the context of his infidelity. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Tyler's mysterious absences, his secretive phone calls, his sudden lack of interest in our marriage. It all made sense if he'd been planning to leave me for Brittany. But instead of asking for a divorce or having an honest conversation about his feelings, he'd chosen to destroy me publicly, to humiliate me in front of our friends, while demonstrating his power to control every aspect of my life. Standing there in the freezing cold, watching the warm lights of my own house while knowing that my husband was inside with another woman, I felt something fundamental break inside me. Not just my heart or my trust, though those were certainly shattered beyond repair. What broke was my willingness to accept Tyler's version of reality, my commitment to preserving his comfort at the expense of my own dignity, my belief that our marriage was worth saving. Mark was already calling 911, his voice sharp with anger as he explained the situation to the dispatcher. "I need police at this address immediately. A man has locked his wife out of their home in sub-freezing weather while he's inside with another woman. This is domestic abuse and adultery, and the victim is at risk of hypothermia." His clinical description of our situation made it real in a way that crystallized my resolve. Tyler had declared war on me tonight, using methods that were designed to break me down completely. He'd recruited allies, planned timing, and executed a strategy that was meant to leave me powerless and humiliated while he claimed victory in the most public way possible. What he didn't know was that he'd just unleashed something in me that had been dormant for 3 years of marriage to someone who mistook my kindness for weakness. As sirens began wailing in the distance, growing closer to our neighborhood, I realized that Tyler's perfect plan was about to become his worst nightmare. He'd wanted to demonstrate his power over me, but instead he'd given me everything I needed to destroy him completely. The evidence of his cruelty was witnessed by multiple people, his affair was exposed beyond any possibility of denial, and his methods were so egregious that even his own friends were calling the police against him. The woman he'd locked outside in the snow, the wife he'd planned to discard after systematically humiliating her, was about to become the architect of his complete destruction. Tyler had made the mistake of believing that 3 years of emotional manipulation had broken my spirit permanently. He was about to discover exactly how wrong he'd been about that, and about me. The police arrived within 12 minutes, their red and blue lights painting our snow-covered neighborhood in urgent colors that announced to everyone within a 3-block radius that something serious was happening at the Thompson house. 2 officers approached our group on the deck while a third went directly to the front door, and I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that Tyler's carefully orchestrated humiliation was about to become a very public legal matter that he couldn't control or manipulate. Officer Martinez, a woman in her 40s with the kind of steady competence that came from years of handling domestic situations, took charge immediately. She wrapped me in a thermal blanket from their emergency kit while Officer Johnson began taking statements from my friends, and I watched through our living room window as Tyler finally appeared at the front door, his confident demeanor shifting rapidly to confusion and then alarm as he realized the scope of what was happening. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to tell me exactly what occurred here tonight," Officer Martinez said, her voice gentle but professional as she guided me toward the patrol car where we could talk privately. "Take your time and give me as much detail as you can remember, starting from when you first realized something was wrong." Her approach was methodical and thorough, and I understood that she was building a case rather than simply responding to a neighborly dispute. As I recounted the evening's events, from Tyler's mysterious morning departure to his deliberate locking of the door while I watched, Officer Martinez took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions that revealed her experience with domestic abuse cases. She was particularly interested in the timeline of Tyler's behavior changes, the presence of Brittany at our party, and the fact that multiple witnesses had observed Tyler's deliberately cruel actions. "The pattern you're describing suggests premeditation rather than impulsive behavior," she said when I finished my initial account. "Your husband appears to have planned this incident, coordinated with at least one other person, and executed it in a way designed to maximize your humiliation and distress. That elevates this beyond a simple domestic dispute into something much more serious." Her clinical assessment of Tyler's actions confirmed what I'd begun to understand about the calculated nature of his cruelty. Through the patrol car window, I could see Officer Johnson interviewing Tyler at our front door, while the third officer, Detective Chen, spoke with Brittany separately in our driveway. Tyler was gesticulating animatedly, clearly trying to offer explanations that would minimize his culpability, but his body language suggested panic rather than confidence. Brittany appeared to be crying, though from this distance I couldn't tell if her tears were genuine distress or calculated performance. Ashley approached the patrol car and asked Officer Martinez if she could provide additional testimony about what she'd witnessed. "I've known Jess and Tyler for 5 years, she said, her voice tight with anger. "Tyler has never behaved like this before, at least not in front of other people. But the way he acted tonight, the planning involved, the cruelty of it. This isn't someone having a bad night. This is someone who wanted to destroy his wife in the most humiliating way possible." Officer Martinez nodded and directed Ashley to Officer Johnson for a formal statement, but not before asking me a question that would prove crucial to everything that followed. "Mrs. Thompson, beyond tonight's incident, have there been other signs of controlling or abusive behavior that you might not have recognized at the time? Financial manipulation, isolation from friends and family, undermining your confidence, anything that made you question your own judgment?" The question opened floodgates of memory that I'd been unconsciously suppressing for months. Tyler's gradual takeover of our financial decisions. His subtle discouragement of my friendships with people he claimed didn't understand our relationship. His way of making me feel guilty for questioning his increasingly frequent absences and secretive behavior. What I'd interpreted as normal marital adjustment was actually a systematic campaign to erode my independence and self-trust. He's been taking control of more and more aspects of our life together, I admitted, the words coming easier once I started speaking them aloud. The bank accounts, the social calendar, even deciding which of my friends he thought were good influences. I thought he was just being protective, but now I'm wondering if he was isolating me systematically. The pattern became clearer as I articulated it, revealing a level of manipulation that was far more sophisticated than tonight's obvious cruelty. Officer Martinez made additional notes and then excused herself to confer with her colleagues about Tyler's explanations. I watched through the car window as the three officers formed a huddle near our front steps. Their conversation animated enough to suggest that Tyler's version of events wasn't matching the witness statements they'd collected. When Detective Chen pulled out handcuffs, I felt a surge of vindication that surprised me with its intensity. Tyler's arrest happened quickly and efficiently, his protests echoing across our neighborhood as Officer Johnson read him his rights, while neighbors peered out of windows to see what was causing the commotion. The man who had spent the evening demonstrating his power over me was suddenly powerless himself, reduced to shouting denials and demands for lawyers while being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. The reversal was so complete and satisfying that I almost felt sorry for him, until I remembered the sound of his laughter while I froze outside my own home. Brittany's situation proved more complicated because she hadn't technically committed any crimes, but Detective Chen's questioning had revealed inconsistencies in her story that suggested she knew more about Tyler's plan than she'd initially admitted. When the detective approached our patrol car to update Officer Martinez, I learned that Brittany had been caught in several lies about her text message communications and her reasons for being at our party. She claims she barely knows your husband and only came to the party because her own husband suggested it, Detective Chen reported. But her phone records show extensive communication with Tyler over the past 6 weeks, including messages sent and received during the time period when he claims he was handling work emergencies this morning. The evidence was building a picture of conspiracy that went far beyond a simple affair. Officer Martinez asked if I wanted to press charges beyond the domestic abuse and unlawful imprisonment counts that Tyler was already facing. The question forced me to consider how far I was willing to go in pursuing justice, and I realized that my anger had crystallized into something much more focused and determined than I'd expected. Tyler hadn't just humiliated me tonight. He'd revealed himself to be someone who was fundamentally unsafe to be married to. I want to pursue every possible charge, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If Tyler planned this with Brittany's help, if he's been systematically manipulating our marriage while conducting an affair, I want the full legal consequences for both of them. The decision felt empowering in a way that surprised me, like I was finally advocating for myself after years of making excuses for Tyler's increasingly problematic behavior. While the officers finished processing the scene, Ashley and David stayed with me to help coordinate practical matters like changing the locks and securing our house. Jennifer had gone home to get spare clothes and blankets, and Mark was documenting everything with his phone to ensure we had comprehensive evidence of Tyler's actions and their aftermath. My friend's immediate mobilization to protect and support me contrasted sharply with Tyler's betrayal, highlighting how completely he'd misjudged both my character and my support network. The locksmith arrived within an hour, recommended by Officer Martinez as someone who specialized in emergency domestic security situations. As he worked to change every lock on our house, I felt a profound sense of reclaiming my space and safety. Tyler would no longer be able to control my access to my own home, and the physical act of changing the locks felt symbolic of larger changes I was beginning to plan for our marriage and my future. Detective Chen returned as the locksmith was finishing to inform me that Tyler's phone had been seized as evidence, and that the initial examination had revealed a text message thread with Brittany that proved premeditation for tonight's events. We found messages discussing timing, coordination, and specific references to humiliating you in front of your friends, she said. This wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty. It was a planned assault on your dignity and safety, The legal terminology made Tyler's actions sound even more serious than they'd felt in the moment, and I realized that what I'd experienced wasn't just personal betrayal, but actual criminal behavior that would have lasting consequences for Tyler's future. The man who had treated our marriage like a game he could win through manipulation and cruelty was about to discover that his actions had real-world legal ramifications he apparently hadn't considered. Once the immediate crisis was resolved and our house was secured, I found myself alone for the first time since the evening began, sitting in my living room where Tyler had laughed while I froze outside. The space felt different now. Not just because Tyler was gone, but because I was different. The woman who had spent 3 years making excuses for increasingly unacceptable behavior had been replaced by someone who was ready to fight for her own dignity and future. My first call was to Sarah Chen, the divorce attorney Ashley had recommended after her own sister's difficult separation. Even though it was after midnight on New Year's Day, Sarah answered her emergency line with the kind of professionalism that suggested she was accustomed to crisis situations. When I explained what had happened, her response was immediate and reassuring. "What Tyler did tonight constitutes multiple forms of abuse and provides grounds for an emergency protective order," she said. "But more importantly for your divorce case, his actions tonight, especially with witnesses and police documentation, will make it very difficult for him to claim that your marriage failed due to irreconcilable differences rather than his deliberate misconduct." The legal implications were becoming clearer, and I realized that Tyler's plan to humiliate me had actually provided me with powerful ammunition for the divorce proceedings I was now determined to pursue. Sarah scheduled an emergency meeting for the next morning and advised me to begin documenting everything I could remember about Tyler's recent behavior, financial decisions, and changes in our relationship dynamic. The pattern of control and manipulation you're describing, combined with tonight's incident, suggests that Tyler has been planning to leave this marriage for some time while positioning himself to claim maximum financial benefit, she explained. "We need to move quickly to protect your assets and ensure he doesn't have time to hide or transfer property." The mention of financial protection reminded me that Tyler had access to all of our accounts and knew all of my personal information. My second call was to my bank's fraud protection line, where I reported unauthorized access concerns and requested immediate freezes on all accounts Tyler could access. The customer service representative was sympathetic and efficient, implementing security measures that would prevent any financial surprises while I sorted out the legal aspects of our separation. As dawn broke over Denver, painting our snow-covered neighborhood in soft pink light, I realized that Tyler's calculated cruelty had accomplished something he never intended. It had freed me from any remaining illusions about our marriage and given me the clarity to fight back without guilt or hesitation. The woman he'd tried to destroy by locking her out in the snow had emerged stronger, angrier, and infinitely more dangerous to his future than he'd ever imagined possible. My third call was to Rebecca Santos, a private investigator Sarah had recommended who specialized in uncovering hidden assets and documenting infidelity in divorce cases. Rebecca's voice was crisp and professional despite the early hour, and her questions revealed experience with cases involving systematic deception and financial manipulation. "Based on what you're telling me about your husband's recent behavior and the coordination with this other woman, I suspect we're looking at a much larger pattern of deception than just tonight's incident," she said. "Men who are capable of the kind of premeditated cruelty you've described are usually hiding multiple forms of misconduct. Give me 48 hours and I'll have a complete picture of Tyler's activities, finances, and communications over the past year." The efficiency with which my new legal team was mobilizing gave me confidence that Tyler's advantage in planning and surprise was about to be overwhelmed by superior resources and professional expertise. He'd spent weeks or months plotting to humiliate me in front of our friends, but I was about to unleash a coordinated professional investigation that would expose every aspect of his deception and misconduct. Rebecca's preliminary research began immediately, and her first callback came within 6 hours with information that made my blood run cold. Tyler hadn't just been having an affair with Brittany. He'd been systematically transferring money from our joint accounts into investments and accounts that only he could access. The amounts involved were staggering. Nearly $60,000 over the past 8 months, taken in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic notifications, but large enough to constitute major theft of marital assets. "He's been planning to leave you for at least a year," Rebecca reported, her voice grim with professional anger. "The financial transfers, the secret communications, the way he's been isolating you from your support network. This is textbook economic abuse combined with a long-term exit strategy. Tyler wasn't just planning to humiliate you last night. He was planning to leave you financially devastated and emotionally destroyed." The scope of Tyler's betrayal was becoming clear, and I realized that his cruelty went far beyond locking me out on New Year's Eve. He'd been systematically stealing from me while pretending to love me, manipulating my trust to fund his affair and his exit strategy. The man I'd been married to for 3 years had been treating our entire relationship as a criminal enterprise designed to enrich himself at my expense. Sarah's assessment was equally damning when she reviewed Rebecca's initial findings. Tyler's behavior constitutes multiple felonies, including theft, financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud, she said during our morning meeting. But more importantly for our purposes, it demonstrates that your marriage has been based on systematic deception rather than any good faith effort to build a life together. This gives us grounds to pursue not just divorce but criminal charges and full restitution of everything he's stolen. The transformation in my legal position was remarkable. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been a woman locked out of her own house, humiliated and powerless. Now I was the plaintiff in multiple legal actions that would destroy Tyler's life as thoroughly as he'd tried to destroy mine. The difference was that my methods would be legal, documented, and professionally executed, rather than the amateur cruelty he'd relied on. My fourth call was to my employer, explaining that I would need several days off to handle a family emergency. My supervisor, Michelle, was understanding and supportive, especially when I provided a brief explanation of Tyler's arrest and the domestic violence charges. She assured me that my job was secure, and that the company's employee assistance program included legal and counseling resources that might be helpful during my divorce proceedings. By noon on January 1st, I had assembled a team of professionals who were systematically dismantling Tyler's life while building an ironclad case for my complete financial and legal protection. Sarah was filing emergency motions to freeze all marital assets and prevent Tyler from accessing any joint property. Rebecca was documenting every aspect of Tyler's infidelity and financial crimes. My bank was implementing fraud protections that would prevent any further unauthorized access to my money. The contrast between Tyler's amateurish cruelty and my professional response was stark. He'd relied on surprise, intimidation, and public humiliation to achieve his goals, assuming that I would be too shocked and ashamed to fight back effectively. Instead, his actions had provided me with everything I needed to pursue him through legal channels that would have permanent consequences for his future. Tyler's first call from jail came that afternoon, his voice strained with panic as he tried to convince me that the previous night had been a misunderstanding that we could work through privately. "Jess, please don't let this get out of hand," he pleaded. "I know I made some bad decisions, but we can fix this without involving lawyers and judges. I love you, and I want to make things right between us." The attempted manipulation was so transparent that I almost laughed. Tyler had spent months planning to financially devastate me while conducting an affair, had publicly humiliated me in front of our friends, and had committed multiple felonies in service of his cruel plan. Now he wanted to resolve things privately because he was beginning to understand the legal consequences of his actions. "Tyler, the only thing I want from you now is a full accounting of every penny you've stolen from our marriage and a complete confession about your affair with Brittany," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Everything else will be handled through my attorney and the criminal justice system. You made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences." His response revealed the narcissistic rage that had always lurked beneath his charming exterior. When manipulation failed, Tyler immediately shifted to threats and blame, claiming that I was overreacting and that his actions hadn't been serious enough to justify the legal response I was pursuing. The conversation confirmed everything my legal team had told me about abusive partners. They never accept responsibility for their actions and always try to minimize the harm they've caused. By the end of that first day, Tyler's perfect plan had become his worst nightmare. He was facing criminal charges that could result in years of prison time, his affair was documented beyond any possibility of denial, and his theft of marital assets was being traced and calculated by professionals who specialized in financial crimes. The woman he'd tried to destroy was not only fighting back but winning decisively. The most satisfying part was knowing that Tyler had done all of this to himself. Every piece of evidence against him had been created by his own actions, every witness had been assembled by his own planning, and every legal consequence had been triggered by his own choices. I hadn't needed to stoop to his level of cruelty. I'd simply needed to document his behavior and let the legal system respond to his crimes. As I went to sleep in my own house on January 1st, surrounded by new locks and fresh security measures, I felt safer and more empowered than I had in years. Tyler's plan to destroy me had instead revealed his true character, while freeing me to build a life based on honesty and respect, rather than manipulation and control. The war he declared on New Year's Eve was already over, and I had won more completely than he could have ever imagined possible. 6 months after Tyler's spectacular New Year's Eve downfall, I stood in the conference room of Chen & Associates, watching my ex-husband's attorney struggle to explain why his client deserved anything other than complete financial ruin. The mahogany table was covered with evidence that Rebecca's investigation had uncovered: bank statements showing systematic theft, text message records proving premeditated conspiracy, photographs of Tyler and Brittany's secret meetings at expensive restaurants, and financial documents that revealed the scope of their plan to defraud me. Tyler himself looked nothing like the confident man who had once locked me out in the snow, his prison pallor and defeated posture telling the story of what 6 months in county jail had done to his arrogance. The transformation in Tyler's appearance was almost shocking. The man who had taken such pride in his physical fitness and polished appearance now wore an ill-fitting public defender's suit that hung loosely on his diminished frame. His hair had grown out unevenly, his hands showed the calluses of prison labor, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had finally begun to understand the full consequences of his actions. When he glanced at me across the conference table, I saw none of the calculating confidence that had characterized his behavior during our marriage, only desperate fear about his future. Sarah Chen had prepared meticulously for this final divorce hearing, and her presentation of our case was a masterclass in legal strategy. She began with a timeline that showed Tyler's systematic preparation for destroying our marriage, starting with his first consultation with a divorce attorney 18 months before our New Year's Eve confrontation. The evidence revealed that Tyler had been planning to leave me long before his affair with Brittany began, having researched strategies for hiding assets and minimizing his financial obligations in a divorce. "Your Honor, what we're seeing here isn't a marriage that failed due to incompatibility," Sarah explained to Judge Williams, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years fighting for women in similar situations. "This is a carefully orchestrated financial crime, disguised as a romantic relationship. Mr. Thompson married my client with the express purpose of gaining access to her inheritance, systematically stole from their joint accounts while conducting an affair, and then attempted to destroy her psychologically when he was ready to move on to his next victim." The financial evidence was devastating in its scope and detail. Rebecca's investigation had uncovered not just the $60,000 Tyler had stolen from our accounts, but additional hidden assets totaling nearly another $40,000. He had opened credit cards in both our names without my knowledge, taken cash advances that he'd used to fund his affair with Brittany, and even forged my signature on investment documents that gave him sole control over accounts I'd funded with my grandmother's money. Tyler's attorney, a public defender named James Patterson, who clearly understood the hopelessness of his client's position, made a half-hearted attempt to argue for leniency based on Tyler's lack of prior criminal history. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that he made serious errors in judgment, but we would argue that the financial consequences being sought by Mrs. Thompson are disproportionate to the actual harm caused. Mr. Thompson is a skilled tradesman who can provide reasonable restitution over time if given the opportunity to rebuild his career." Judge Williams's response was swift and unsympathetic. "Mr. Patterson, your client didn't make errors in judgment. He committed multiple felonies over an extended period while systematically psychologically abusing his wife. The financial consequences he's facing are a direct result of his own criminal behavior, not judicial vindictiveness. Mrs. Thompson is entitled to complete restitution for the money that was stolen from her. plus damages for the emotional distress caused by your client's deliberate cruelty. The divorce settlement was everything Sarah had promised it would be, and more. Tyler was ordered to pay back every penny he'd stolen, plus interest and penalties that brought the total to over $120,000. The house, which I'd funded with my inheritance, was awarded to me outright, along with his truck, his tools, and his retirement accounts. His construction company, already destroyed by the criminal charges and negative publicity, was liquidated with the proceeds going toward his restitution debt. More satisfying than the financial victory was the protective order that would prevent Tyler from contacting me for the next 5 years. The judge was explicit about the terms: no phone calls, no text messages, no emails, no social media contact, and no communication through third parties. Tyler was forbidden from coming within 500 feet of my home, my workplace, or any establishment where I was known to be a regular customer. Violation of the order would result in immediate imprisonment. The criminal trial had taken place 2 months earlier, and Tyler's conviction on multiple felony charges had been even more decisive than the divorce proceedings. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Maria Rodriguez, had presented our case as an example of how domestic violence had evolved in the digital age. Tyler Thompson represents a new breed of abuser, she had told the jury. He used sophisticated financial manipulation and psychological warfare to control and ultimately destroy his victim, culminating in a public humiliation designed to break her spirit permanently. The testimony of our friends had been particularly damaging to Tyler's defense. Ashley, David, Mark, and Jennifer had each taken the stand to describe what they'd witnessed on New Year's Eve, their accounts painting a picture of premeditated cruelty that left the jury visibly disturbed. Mark's testimony was especially powerful when he described Tyler's laughter while I stood locked outside in dangerous weather, his voice breaking with emotion as he recounted the callousness of my husband's behavior. Brittany had eventually been charged as an accessory to Tyler's financial crimes, though her sentence was limited to probation and community service due to her cooperation with the prosecution. Her testimony against Tyler had been devastating, revealing the extent of their planning and the specific methods they'd used to coordinate the theft of marital assets. She described how Tyler had convinced her that I was psychologically unstable and financially irresponsible, justifying their theft as protecting money that he would have earned anyway. The personal cost to Brittany had been severe, even without significant jail time. Her marriage had exploded when her husband discovered the affair, and the subsequent divorce had left her with minimal assets and no spousal support. Her reputation in Denver's construction community was permanently destroyed, making it impossible for her to find work in the only industry where she had connections. She'd moved away from Colorado entirely, reportedly working service jobs in small towns where no one knew about her role in Tyler's crimes. Rebecca's investigation had uncovered details about Tyler and Brittany's relationship that made their betrayal even more calculated than I'd initially understood. They had been communicating for nearly 2 years before their physical affair began, with Tyler grooming her as both a romantic partner and a financial accomplice. Their text messages revealed discussions about my personality, my finances, and my vulnerabilities that were so clinical and predatory that even Rebecca, who had seen hundreds of infidelity cases, was shocked by their callousness. The evidence showed that Tyler had been studying me like a mark in a con game, documenting my habits, my friendships, and my emotional triggers with the thoroughness of a professional grifter. He had kept detailed notes about my work schedule, my financial accounts, and my relationships with friends and family, all designed to help him maximize his control while minimizing my ability to seek help or support when he was ready to destroy me. One of the most disturbing discoveries was Tyler's research into domestic violence tactics and psychological manipulation. His browser history revealed that he had spent hours reading about emotional abuse techniques, financial control strategies, and methods for isolating victims from their support networks. What I had experienced wasn't instinctive cruelty but calculated psychological warfare based on proven methods for destroying someone's sense of self-worth and independence. The transformation in my own life began even before the legal proceedings were complete. I had used the time during Tyler's incarceration to completely renovate our house, hiring contractors who were recommended by Sarah's other clients and had experience helping women reclaim spaces that had been contaminated by abusive relationships. Every room was reimagined and rebuilt, erasing not just Tyler's physical presence but the emotional associations that made certain spaces feel unsafe or contaminated. The kitchen became a bright, airy space with white cabinets, quartz countertops, and a large island where I could cook for friends without the shadow of Tyler's control and criticism. I had installed new appliances that reflected my own preferences rather than the compromises I'd made during our marriage, including a professional-grade range that Tyler had always claimed was unnecessary but that I'd secretly wanted for years. Cooking became a source of joy again rather than a performance designed to earn approval. The master bedroom was transformed into a peaceful retreat with soft blues and grays that promoted calm rather than the dramatic reds Tyler had insisted on because they were, quote, more sophisticated. I had replaced our shared furniture with pieces that reflected my own taste, including a reading chair by the window where I could enjoy my morning coffee while looking out at the garden I was planning for spring. The walk-in closet was reorganized to hold only my belongings, and I felt a profound sense of freedom every time I opened those doors. Ashley had been my constant support throughout the renovation process, helping me choose paint colors and furniture, while also serving as an emotional sounding board when the transformation felt overwhelming. "You're not just redecorating," she observed during one of our weekend shopping trips. "You're reclaiming your identity after years of having it suppressed. Tyler tried to erase who you really were, and now you get to rediscover yourself." Her insight was accurate in ways that became clearer as the months passed. I began to remember preferences and interests that I'd abandoned during my marriage because Tyler had dismissed them as impractical or immature. I started reading fiction again, something Tyler had always criticized as a waste of time that could be better spent on improving literature or professional development. I bought art that made me happy rather than pieces that impressed visitors, and I played music that reflected my actual taste rather than Tyler's sophisticated preferences. The therapy Sarah had recommended proved crucial to my healing process, though the work was more difficult and complicated than I'd expected. Dr. Martinez specialized in helping people recover from emotional abuse, and she helped me understand how Tyler's manipulation had gradually eroded my confidence and independence over the course of our relationship. "Abusers are skilled at making their victims question their own judgment," she explained during one of our early sessions. "Tyler spent years training you to doubt your instincts and accept his version of reality as more valid than your own experience." Through therapy, I began to recognize patterns in Tyler's behavior that I'd minimized or rationalized during our marriage. His gradual isolation of me from friends he deemed bad influences had been systematic, rather than protective. His control over our finances, disguised as managing our future security, had actually been preparation for theft. His way of making me feel guilty for questioning his increasingly secretive behavior had been gaslighting, designed to prevent me from investigating his deception. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my response to Tyler's abuse hadn't been weakness, but a normal reaction to systematic manipulation. "You adapted to an environment where questioning your husband's behavior was punished and accepting his control was rewarded," she explained. "That adaptation was actually a survival strategy, but it's no longer necessary now that you're safe. Learning to trust your own judgment again is the most important part of your recovery." The process of rebuilding my confidence was gradual but steady. I started with small decisions that Tyler would have previously controlled, like choosing restaurants for dinner with friends, or planning weekend activities based on my own interests. Each independent choice reinforced my ability to trust my own preferences and judgment, slowly rebuilding the self-assurance that Tyler had systematically undermined. The financial security that resulted from the divorce settlement gave me freedom I'd never experienced as an adult. Tyler's restitution payments, garnished from his prison wages and any future employment, would continue for years, providing me with ongoing income that wasn't dependent on my own work. More importantly, the return of my stolen money meant I could make choices based on my own goals, rather than financial constraints imposed by Tyler's theft. I decided to start my own marketing consultancy, something I'd dreamed about for years but never pursued while Tyler was controlling our financial decisions. He had always insisted that entrepreneurship was too risky, and that I should focus on advancing within established companies rather than striking out on my own. Without his constant criticism and discouragement, I discovered that my business instincts were actually quite strong, and that my professional skills were more valuable than Tyler had ever acknowledged. My business, Elevation Marketing, launched 4 months after the divorce was finalized, specializing in helping small businesses develop authentic brand voices and effective digital strategies. The name was chosen deliberately to reflect my own journey, from the depths of Tyler's abuse to the heights of personal and professional success. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tyler's attempt to destroy my life had actually freed me to pursue goals I'd abandoned during our marriage. The process of starting my own company revealed capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. Without Tyler's constant undermining of my confidence, I discovered that I was naturally good at client relations, strategic thinking, and creative problem solving. My first clients were referrals from friends who had witnessed Tyler's abuse and wanted to support my independence, but word spread quickly about the quality of my work and my commitment to helping other small business owners succeed. Within 6 months, Elevation Marketing had more clients than I could handle alone, and I was facing the exciting challenge of deciding whether to expand by hiring employees or limit my client base to maintain work-life balance. The decision to hire my first employee, a talented graphic designer named Maria, who had recently graduated from the University of Colorado, felt like a milestone that would have been impossible during my marriage to Tyler. Maria brought fresh energy and creativity to the business, and working with her helped me understand what healthy professional relationships looked like. She offered ideas and feedback without trying to control or undermine my authority, and she respected my expertise while contributing her own skills to our joint projects. The contrast with Tyler's constant criticism and competition was stark, highlighting how abnormal my marriage had been. My social life expanded dramatically as I reconnected with friends. Tyler had gradually pushed away and formed new relationships with people who appreciated my authentic personality. The dinner parties I'd once hosted to please Tyler became celebrations of genuine friendship, filled with laughter and conversation that felt natural rather than performed. My house became a gathering place for people who supported and encouraged each other rather than a stage for manipulation and control. One of the most healing aspects of my new social life was the way my friends rallied around my business and my recovery. Ashley became my unofficial marketing director, recommending my services to her colleagues and friends. David, who worked in finance, helped me set up proper business banking and accounting systems. Mark, with his construction industry connections, referred several contractors who needed help with their marketing efforts. Jennifer, a lawyer herself, provided informal advice about business legal issues and contracts. The support network that emerged during my recovery was everything Tyler had tried to prevent me from having during our marriage. These weren't people who enabled bad behavior or ignored warning signs. They were friends who celebrated my successes, supported me through challenges, and provided honest feedback when I needed perspective. Their loyalty and encouragement stood in sharp contrast to Tyler's isolation tactics, and highlighted how much I'd lost during the years when I'd allowed him to control my relationships. Dating wasn't a priority during my first year of recovery, but when I eventually began meeting people, I was amazed by how clearly I could now recognize healthy versus unhealthy relationship dynamics. The therapy and legal process had given me tools for identifying manipulation, respecting my own boundaries, and demanding the kind of partnership Tyler had never been capable of providing. I would never again mistake possessiveness for love or control for protection. My first serious relationship post-Tyler began almost 2 years after the divorce, with a fellow small business owner named Michael, who had hired Elevation Marketing to help with his landscape design company's rebranding. What attracted me to Michael wasn't his success or his appearance, though both were appealing, but his approach to conflict resolution and communication. When we disagreed about project details, he listened to my perspective and worked toward compromise rather than trying to dominate or dismiss my expertise. Michael's respect for my independence and professional capabilities felt revolutionary after years of Tyler's undermining behavior. He celebrated my business successes without feeling threatened, supported my friendships without trying to control them, and encouraged my personal growth without trying to shape me into someone different. The contrast was so stark that it took months for me to fully trust that his supportive behavior was genuine rather than a manipulation tactic. Rebecca's investigation had one final surprise that arrived almost a year after Tyler's arrest, when she discovered additional evidence of his criminal behavior that extended beyond our marriage. Her research into his background revealed that I hadn't been Tyler's first victim, but rather the latest in a pattern of financial and emotional abuse that stretched back to his previous long-term relationships. Two former girlfriends had experienced similar patterns of financial manipulation and psychological control, though neither had pursued legal action when their relationships ended. "He's what we call a serial financial abuser," Rebecca explained when she presented this new evidence. "Tyler has been perfecting these techniques for years, learning from each relationship what works and what doesn't, in terms of controlling and exploiting his partners. You were just unlucky enough to be his most financially vulnerable target, which made you worth the investment of marriage and long-term planning." The revelation that Tyler was essentially a professional predator who targeted women for financial exploitation added another layer of validation to my decision to pursue maximum legal consequences. I hadn't been oversensitive or vindictive in my response to his abuse. I had been appropriately defending myself against someone who made a lifestyle of destroying women for profit. The knowledge that my legal victory had prevented Tyler from victimizing other women in the future gave additional meaning to the difficult process of prosecution and divorce. Tyler's attempts to appeal his criminal conviction were unsuccessful, as were his efforts to modify the divorce settlement through claims of excessive punishment. The appeals court upheld both his criminal sentence and the financial judgment against him, noting that the evidence of premeditation and systematic abuse warranted the harsh consequences he'd received. His parole applications were repeatedly denied due to his continued refusal to accept responsibility for his actions and his apparent lack of genuine remorse. The prison system's psychological evaluations of Tyler revealed a personality profile consistent with narcissistic and antisocial tendencies that made him unlikely to reform without intensive intervention. The reports described someone who viewed relationships as transactions to be manipulated for personal gain rather than genuine partnerships based on mutual respect and affection. The clinical language confirmed what I'd experienced firsthand. Tyler was fundamentally incapable of the empathy and commitment required for healthy relationships. Brittany's fate proved equally instructive about the long-term consequences of participating in Tyler's schemes. Her cooperation with the prosecution had protected her from serious criminal charges, but the social and professional consequences of her actions had been devastating. The construction industry in Colorado was tight-knit enough that word of her affair and financial crimes had spread quickly, making it impossible for her to find employment in her field. Her divorce had left her with minimal assets, and her attempt to rebuild her life in Nebraska had been complicated by the criminal background checks required for many jobs. According to Rebecca's sources, Brittany had attempted to contact Tyler several times during his imprisonment, apparently hoping to resume their relationship when he was released. Tyler had rejected her attempts at communication, apparently recognizing that maintaining any connection to her would complicate his parole prospects and limit his ability to rebuild his life after prison. The woman who had helped him destroy our marriage had become a liability he was eager to discard, highlighting the transactional nature of their relationship. On the second anniversary of that infamous New Year's Eve, I hosted a celebration party for the friends who had supported me through the worst night of my life and the legal battle that followed. The guest list included not just my original friend group, but also new relationships I'd formed through my business and recovery process. Ashley made a toast that brought tears to my eyes. To Jessica, who showed all of us what it looks like to turn betrayal into triumph and cruelty into strength. Tyler thought he was destroying you, but he actually set you free to become the incredible woman you were always meant to be. The party was held in my completely renovated house, which now reflected my own personality and preferences rather than compromises forced by Tyler's control. The kitchen, where I'd once walked on eggshells trying to please him, was filled with laughter, as friends shared stories and celebrated each other's successes. The living room where Tyler had plotted my humiliation was now a warm gathering space, where people felt comfortable being themselves. As I looked around at the faces of people who had supported me through my darkest period and continued to celebrate my recovery, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. Tyler's plan to humiliate me had instead revealed my own strength. His theft had funded my independence, and his cruelty had taught me to recognize and demand genuine love and respect in all. My relationships. My business continued to grow throughout the second and third years after the divorce, eventually expanding to include 4 employees and a client base that stretched across the Rocky Mountain region. The success wasn't just financial, though the income far exceeded what I'd earned as Tyler's controlled wife. More importantly, running my own company had given me confidence in my own judgment and capabilities that no abuser would ever be able to undermine again. The last I heard about Tyler came through Rebecca's ongoing monitoring of his situation, which she maintained as part of ensuring my continued safety. He had been released from prison after serving 18 months, but was struggling to find stable employment due to his criminal record and the destruction of his professional reputation. He was working manual labor jobs to pay his restitution debt, living in a studio apartment, and driving a used car that barely ran. His attempts to restart his construction company had failed due to lack of bonding capability and the reluctance of former clients to work with someone convicted of financial crimes. More satisfying than Tyler's financial struggles was the report that he had been unable to maintain any significant romantic relationships since his release. The women he approached eventually learned about his criminal history and his pattern of abusive behavior, making it impossible for him to establish the trust necessary to begin another cycle of exploitation. The predator who had once seemed so charming and successful was now recognized as a dangerous threat by anyone with access to basic background information. The protective order that prevented Tyler from contacting me was scheduled to expire after 5 years, but Sarah had already filed paperwork to extend it indefinitely based on his continued refusal to accept responsibility for his actions and the ongoing financial obligations that connected us through his restitution payments. The legal system had provided layers of protection that ensured Tyler would never again have the opportunity to insert himself into my life or threaten my safety and independence. As I approached the 5th anniversary of my divorce and the complete end of Tyler's influence on my life, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred since that freezing New Year's Eve when I'd stood locked out of my own house. The woman Tyler had tried to destroy through calculated cruelty and systematic abuse had emerged stronger, more successful, and infinitely happier than she'd ever been during their marriage. His plan to break me had instead broken the chains that had been holding me back from realizing my full potential. The fairy tale ending wasn't about finding a perfect romantic partner or achieving some predetermined definition of success. It was about discovering that I had always possessed the strength to save myself, the intelligence to build my own prosperity, and the courage to demand the respect and love I deserved. Tyler's cruelty had been the catalyst, but my transformation was entirely my own achievement, built through determination, hard work, and the support of people who genuinely cared about my well-being. Looking forward, my future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities that belonged entirely to me. My business continued to grow, my relationships were healthy and supportive, and my confidence in my own judgment was unshakable. Tyler had thought he was declaring war on a weak woman who would accept defeat gracefully. Instead, he had awakened a force that was infinitely stronger, smarter, and more determined than he had ever been capable of becoming. The victory was complete, permanent, and entirely deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.